I hadn't meant to come back. Not tonight. Not after all the "We're over, it's fine" conversations, the long silences we both pretended weren't heavy, the careful steps around memories that still ached. Yet here I was, leaning against the doorway of the little cafe where she always sat by the window, sipping coffee like it was a ritual and not a pause between the chaos outside. And when she lifted up that soft, almost imperceptible tilt of her head, I realized that I hadn't left at all. Not really. She was graceful in the way time had only deepened, not dulled, her presence. The lines around her eyes spoke of laughter, worry, choices, and pain, but mostly, to me, they were the maps I'd traced 1,000 times in memory. Tonight she wore a dark green blouse that caught the light just enough to make her skin glow in warmth I wanted to drown in. And the way her fingers lingered on the rim of her mug, tapping softly, unconsciously, I thought she didn't know how magnetic she still was. I moved closer. Not because I planned to, not because I wanted her to notice, I just did. My hand brushed hers as I reached for the same sugar jar, a collision electric and awkward all at once. She looked at me then, and for a moment the cafe, the hum of distant chatter, the clink of dishes, it all faded. There was something in that look, the way her lips parted just slightly, almost as if she had words she'd wanted to say for years but couldn't. Or maybe she had and had decided not to. I'll never know. "Hey," I said too quietly, my voice catching somewhere between casual and confessional. "Hey," she replied, tilting her head again, that faint smile tugging at one corner of her mouth. That small curve was enough to make my chest tighten. We sat, the distance between us measured in inches, yet charged like a live wire. I watched her stir her coffee slowly, deliberately, and imagined her stirring me, my thoughts, my stubborn, quiet obsession. I wanted to reach across the table, trace the line of her jaw, feel the warmth of her hand linger in mine longer than it should. Instead, I did nothing. I let the brush of her fingers against mine become the conversation we weren't having. She laughed at something someone at the counter said, and the sound was soft but piercing. I could have sworn she had been laughing just for me, like the world had shrunk down to the space between us. And then, just like that, she leaned back, exhaling as if letting go of something she hadn't known she'd been holding. Her eyes found mine again, unwavering, a challenge wrapped in comfort. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught. She smiled faintly, knowingly, and I realized she was holding back, too. Holding back herself from something she wanted badly, or something she thought she should. And then, the bell over the door jingled, breaking the quiet spell. She glanced toward it, a flicker of annoyance, a twinge of distraction, and in that small shift, the room reminded me I was still an outsider in this moment we hadn't fully claimed. Yet when she turned back, our eyes met again, heavier this time, full of unspoken questions. And I felt, somewhere deep and dangerous, that nothing had moved on at all. Not us. I shouldn't have noticed the way her hand rested on the edge of the table, the soft brush of her fingers against the wood, but I did. Every gesture felt magnified tonight, as if the room itself conspired to make her impossible to ignore. She had always been careful around me, careful about her words, her proximity, the way she let her laughter reach me but not too far. And yet here, tonight, those walls seemed thinner. We had history. I'd known her when I was just 20, bright-eyed and clumsy, fascinated by her ease in a world that often felt hostile. She had been married then, or at least, attached, distant in ways I didn't understand at the time. I thought I had moved on, convinced myself I had, but a glance now, her hair brushing her collarbone, the faint scent of lavender mingled with coffee, made all of that feel like a lie. She was untouchable, dangerous in the quiet way she existed. And yet I wanted to reach for her anyway, even if it was foolish. She laughed at some memory she didn't tell me, her eyes sliding over mine for just a second too long, and I caught myself leaning forward, the impulse to close the gap between us more powerful than reason. There was a risk, always, a chasm of perception and judgment, the whisper of scandal if anyone knew, the age difference that society loved to highlight. But those things felt meaningless when she let her hand linger near mine on the tabletop. "You always notice," she said softly, almost accusing, but her voice held warmth beneath it. She didn't say more, and I didn't need her to. The statement was enough, a confession in itself. I shifted in my chair, trying to disguise the way my pulse spiked, but the corner of her mouth twitched, and I knew she saw everything anyway. She leaned forward just slightly, and I smelled the faint trace of her perfume, warm and floral, mingling with the faint smoke of the candle flickering between us. Her breath brushed my cheek as she spoke, and I swallowed hard, aware that each word carried weight far beyond its meaning. I've been alone a lot," she admitted finally, in that quiet way that made it sound like a secret being entrusted rather than a statement. And maybe she hadn't said it to me at all. It was just something she had to let go of, and somehow, I was there to catch it. I wanted to tell her I knew what that felt like. I wanted to tell her that I had spent nights thinking of her in ways I'd never admitted aloud. Instead, I kept my hands still, pretending to examine the rim of my cup, pretending not to feel the pull between us, pretending she wasn't leaning closer every time our knees brushed. Then, as if by accident, or maybe not, I reached for the sugar again, and our fingers touched. Longer this time. No words passed, but the room contracted, the air thickened, and I realized that some things didn't need confession. Some things existed in the silence between us, in the lingering warmth of a hand on a shoulder, in the faint tremor of a breath against skin. And in that pause, that single charged moment where nothing happened but everything did, I understood we weren't alone, not really. I was just about to speak when the ping of a message on her phone startled us both. She glanced down, frowning, and the moment fractured, the warmth between us cracking just slightly. I didn't move, not wanting to break the fragile bubble we'd built, and she didn't either. Her fingers hovered over the screen longer than necessary, and I could see the tension coil in her shoulders, the faint bite of her lip that always betrayed her calm. "Sorry," she said finally, though it wasn't an apology. Her voice was low, careful, measured. I nodded, pretending to check my own messages, even though I didn't care. The table between us suddenly felt like a canyon, the distance screaming where moments before there had been near intimacy. And yet, she hadn't moved away. She was still leaning forward, her hair falling just so over one shoulder, brushing against my arm like a whisper. I wanted to reach out, to tuck it behind her ear, but even the thought made my chest tighten with guilt. We both knew the risks. My age. Her history. The quiet judgments that would follow if anyone noticed. But that didn't stop the pull, the way her warmth hit me like a physical weight, or the subtle way she mirrored my posture, leaning slightly closer as if instinct dictated it. Her eyes caught mine, long, unblinking, and I felt the familiar dizzying rush of being seen, of being caught in something neither of us had fully admitted. My hand twitched, half lifted toward hers, but then a laugh came from the corner of the cafe, a friend she hadn't expected, stepping into the periphery, and we both recoiled just slightly. Her laugh didn't mask the tension, only sharpened it. I could feel her heartbeat brush against mine through the table, rapid, hesitant, and I realized mine was doing the same. We were inches apart, yet worlds away. I don't know, I whispered, barely audible, though she leaned in so close that her breath tickled my cheek. The words were unfinished, hanging like a question with no answer, and she didn't interrupt them. They didn't need to be finished. She brushed her hand against mine under the table, fleeting at first, then lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I wanted to close the gap, wanted to see if the air between us could ignite into something we couldn't name, but the caution we'd learned over years of pretending forced us to pause. The world outside the cafe could have disappeared, and I would have been fine. Just this, the proximity, the shared quiet, the almost touch, was enough. And still, the risk hung over us like a storm cloud, every heartbeat echoing the warning we refused to heed. She leaned just a little closer, the faintest brush of her shoulder against mine, and I felt that delicious, dangerous pull of something inevitable. My lips itched to close the gap. Hers, God, hers, hovered so close I could feel her exhale on me. And yet neither of us moved further. Not yet. When the bell above the door jingled again, we both flinched, but our hands didn't separate entirely. We were pulled closer than ever, held in a tension neither of us could name aloud. And in that moment, I realized how impossible it was to resist, but how necessary it still felt. I could feel the weight of her presence before she even spoke. It wasn't just proximity, it was the gravity pulling me in, relentless, impossible to resist. My chest tightened, my hands clenched without realizing it, and every instinct I had screamed both to stay and to reach for her. "I can't," she murmured, her voice trembling just slightly, betraying the calm she usually wore like armor. She looked down at the table, then back up at me, and the way her eyes searched mine made my pulse hammer like a drum I couldn't control. "I shouldn't be here. Not like this." But she was here. Leaning forward, shoulders brushing mine, the faint brush of her hair against my temple like fire, and I couldn't stop noticing. Couldn't stop wanting. I wanted to tuck it behind her ear, to trail my fingers along the line of her jaw, to feel the soft curve of her neck pressed against my shoulder. "I know," I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper, because anything louder would feel like betrayal. "I know we shouldn't, but we are." Her breath hitched. She leaned just slightly closer, her hand hovering near mine, trembling in that small, perfect hesitation. I reached for it. No, I let it rest there, our fingers brushing, lingering, the air between us thick enough to taste. The cafe around us, the hum of conversation, the clinking of spoons, the flickering candle, vanished. It was just her, just me, and the unbearable tension that had been building for months. "You're reckless," she said, voice tight, and yet there was a tremor in it, a vulnerability I had never seen. "Do you have any idea what this could mean?" I leaned closer, my lips near her ear, careful not to cross the invisible line. "I don't care," I whispered. The words were reckless too, and I felt them vibrate against her skin, stirring something deep inside both of us. Her eyes flicked downward, then back up, and I could see the storm raging behind them: fear, desire, hesitation, longing. She wanted to pull away, to stop this before it unraveled us completely, but every muscle in her body betrayed her. She was leaning in despite herself, shoulder brushing mine, hand so close I could feel the warmth radiating from it. "I can't," she said again, voice breaking now, raw with emotion. "I shouldn't." I cut her off with a whisper. "Then don't." "Not yet. Just stay here." My hand moved almost on its own, brushing the hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear with the faintest touch, just enough to make her shiver. Her lips parted slightly, eyes half-lidded, breath catching, and I knew the moment had arrived, the moment we could cross the line, change everything, admit the truth we'd been dancing around. And then, the door of the cafe swung open with a sharp creak, pulling her gaze away, and the spell shattered. But in that heartbeat, when our eyes met again, the air was electric. We were closer than ever, teetering on the edge, a breath, a second, a whisper from what neither of us could deny. Would we? Could we? Everything hung on that pause. We thought the cafe was empty enough for secrets, but I should have known better. A shadow shifted near the doorway, and my chest tightened immediately. "I didn't mean to." Her voice trailed off, low and startled, eyes darting toward the sudden presence. A friend, someone she knew well, someone who had always kept tabs, stood there, frowning, holding a forgotten jacket. Not seeing me fully, but seeing her. Her hand jerked slightly, brushing against mine under the table. My pulse spiked at the contact, a flash of warmth and desperation that neither of us could ignore. She exhaled, almost silently, and I could feel the tremor in her shoulder, the subtle shiver that ran down her spine when she realized the world had momentarily intruded on our fragile bubble. "Look, I just forgot my coat," the friend said, fumbling, and my gaze flicked to her. She leaned back subtly, as if trying to create distance, but the movement was almost theatrical, her shoulder brushing mine in that infinitesimal way that set my nerves alight. "Right," she murmured, voice tight. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, but I could see the way her hands shook slightly, how her chest rose faster with each breath. She was trying to mask it, But I felt it all, the fear, the anticipation, the hunger she couldn't fully control. Once the friend left, muttering something about a meeting, she sank back into her chair, but the tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it doubled. The reminder that someone could witness this, us, made every movement, every breath, every glance between us feel magnified, urgent, almost unbearable. You, I began, voice low, near enough to her ear for her to feel the vibration. You don't have to pretend anymore. Not with me. Her eyes flicked up, wide and vulnerable, and she swallowed. There was an honesty there, raw and unguarded, that made my chest ache. She leaned slightly forward, brushing past my hand accidentally, or maybe not, sending a shockwave through my body. She hesitated, lips parting, eyes darting away, then back. I've wanted to say something for a long time, but I was scared. The words landed between us like sparks, igniting something that had been smoldering for months. My hand moved almost instinctively, resting near hers, but not quite touching. The air between us vibrated with the tension of what could happen, and I felt it in the tightening of my stomach, the thrum of my heartbeat in my ears. Her breath hitched as she leaned closer, almost imperceptibly, brushing against me again. My own hesitation faltered. I wanted to close the space between us, wanted to claim what had been simmering in silence for so long. Then don't hide it, I whispered. Low. Careful. Almost a command, almost a plea. Her eyes met mine, trembling with something unspoken but understood. And in that moment, we both realized that what we tried to keep safe, what we tried to control, was already beyond control. The question now wasn't if, but when. The cafe felt smaller tonight, as if the world had shrunk to the space between us. Every sound, the clatter of dishes, the faint hum of conversation, the whisper of wind against the window, was background to the storm swirling just beneath our skin. She leaned forward, shoulder brushing mine, just enough to ignite every nerve ending. I could feel her breath on my cheek, warm and hesitant, and my hand itched to reach for hers, to close the distance we'd skirted for months. I can't. I don't know if I should, she whispered, voice trembling but low, as if the words themselves carried weight too dangerous to say aloud. I cupped her hand gently in mine, careful not to push, careful not to step too far, yet unwilling to let her retreat entirely. Then don't think, I said softly. Just feel. Her lips parted slightly, and I saw the storm in her eyes, the desire, the fear, the longing we'd both tried to deny. She was trembling, a subtle shiver that ran through her spine, and I felt it echo in my own chest. The table, the room, the rules we'd built around us, they all seemed meaningless now. We inched closer, the faintest movement, until our knees brushed, a small jolt that made us both pause. I let my forehead rest just a fraction against hers, the heat of her skin searing into mine. Her hand moved against the table, fingers brushing the side of mine in a deliberate hesitation, a question without words. I've wanted this, I murmured, low enough for only her to hear. For so long. Her breath hitched. She leaned into me slightly, the air between us thick with everything we hadn't said. And in that suspended moment, I realized the choice wasn't about what was right or safe, it was about honesty, about surrendering to the truth we both carried alone. Me too, she whispered back, almost breaking, and I could feel the vulnerability in her confession, raw and unpolished. Our hands intertwined slowly, carefully, as if we were testing the waters before plunging into something neither of us could fully control. Every inch we closed was electric, every brush of skin a silent declaration. We weren't just close, we were undeniably, irrevocably tethered, the months of distance and restraint collapsing into this single, fragile connection. I don't care about what anyone thinks, I breathed, and she smiled faintly, leaning against me just enough for me to feel the weight of her trust. The world outside could wait. The doubts, the fears, the judgment, they didn't matter in this moment. All that existed was the clarity that comes from finally seeing someone fully, and being seen in return. She tilted her head slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, eyes half-lidded but steady. Then, we don't stop, she whispered, And it wasn't just about tonight, it was about everything we'd denied ourselves. We didn't need to move further, not yet. Just being here, shoulder to shoulder, fingers tangled, breathing in the same small space, was enough. It was messy, imperfect, human, but it was real. And for the first time in months, I understood her completely. She understood me. We had crossed the line, not into recklessness, not into certainty, but into truth. And for now, that was everything. The cafe had emptied by the time we finally leaned back into our chairs, hands still entwined, breathing slowing from the storm we'd let loose. Outside, the night pressed gently against the windows, cool and quiet, but inside, the space between us felt soft, contained, like the world had finally shrunk to a comfortable, safe corner where only we existed. She rested her head against my shoulder, the faint weight enough to make me feel grounded, tethered, like all the months of hesitation, longing, and stolen glances had led here. Her hair tickled my collarbone, and I found myself brushing it back absently, careful, reverent, afraid even in this moment to break what we'd finally claimed. I was so scared, she admitted softly, voice low, almost a whisper against the hum of the deserted cafe. Of all of it. Of what people would think, of losing control, of losing you. You couldn't lose me, I replied, fingers tightening gently around hers. Not like this. Not after everything we've been through. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and there was no pretense left. No walls. Just the quiet, raw vulnerability of someone who had waited too long to feel safe with someone, and now, finally, could. We laughed softly, a fragile, shared sound that seemed to release months of tension. Her hand in mine felt lighter now, less electric with restraint and more steady with belonging. I leaned closer, forehead resting against hers, breathing in the faint scent of lavender she always carried, and for a moment neither of us moved. We simply existed there, shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, finally close enough to fill the spaces left by absence and longing. I never thought we'd. She began, faltering, and then sighed. I never thought we'd actually get here. Here's fine, I said, voice low, teasing but tender. Here's perfect. Her lips curved in that small, knowing smile, and she pressed her cheek lightly to mine. I brushed her hair back one last time, fingers lingering on the nape of her neck. We've got time, I whispered, to figure it out. Together. And in that simple, messy, human moment, I realized we already had. Time, judgment, distance, it didn't matter anymore. We had each other, fully and without apology, and that was enough. We stayed there for a while, in comfortable silence, letting the warmth of shared breath and subtle touches speak everything words couldn't. The night was ours, and the world outside could wait. Finally, she tilted her head, resting her forehead against mine. Promise me, we won't rush it, she murmured. I promise, I said, pressing my lips briefly to her temple, savoring the weight of the moment. And just like that, we were home. Not in a house, not in perfection, but in each other, fingers intertwined, hearts aligned, knowing that what we'd found in the quiet, in the pauses, in the stolen touches, was real and ours. We didn't need anything else. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?